I need to talk. I know I keep putting this off, but everything has gone way too far this time. This is the part where I say, I'm sorry. So why don't I feel like I am? I try, but it sounds so hollow. What is this shadow inside me? I've felt this before. I can't describe it except that it feels... If I name it, will that make it go away? Why won't the music end? I silenced it, but now it's stuck inside me. It's growing bigger. I don't deserve this. Seasons don't fear the Reaper.
For as long as I can remember, I've always been an avid reader, but I've never been that drawn to novels and short stories that are so-called page-turners that rely on heavily defined plot points and story beats. Instead, I usually find a lot more enjoyment in works of fiction that some people may criticize because, quote-unquote, nothing happens in them. Stories that are more about themes and aesthetics, more about the location where they take place, more about the mood in the air, more about ambiguity and interpretation, less about chit-chat, less about a big perfect payoff at the end where everything is tied up nicely and neatly and indisputably with a shiny bow. This extends to my taste in movies and shows too, and I'm not trying to be difficult or a contrarian here. I just don't enjoy a lot of the stuff that so many people are binging and streaming now because to me it's flat. There's no room for mystery or real interpretation. Everything is spelled out all the time, scene by scene. Characters just move from one room to the next, dumping exposition, not really developing or doing anything interesting, just explaining, blabbering, and I get bored with this. I just do, and in part, it's because this isn't how life works. Personally, professionally, all of us are almost always operating with blind spots. We don't understand what everyone's motives and backstories are. We don't know what'll happen tomorrow, and we might not even understand what happened yesterday, but if we're mindful, if we're observant, we see patterns emerge. We see themes, trends, big ideas playing out in real time in front of us. What we see, of course, is colored by our own past, so it's subjective, even unreliable at times. Cycles often repeat themselves. Sometimes we get trapped, other times we break out of our bad habits, we have an epiphany, we make a change. And I love when this complex but very real dynamic is reflected in the video games I play. This is also why I usually prefer character creators to predetermined protagonists. It's like, it's 2025, this is an interactive medium, why can't I be who I want to be? Why do I have to be limited to this random and maybe corny character the developers are allegedly so obsessed with? Why are so many devs hellbent on making statements with their preset characters versus allowing me to explore a world in earnest and draw my own conclusions? Maybe it's laziness, maybe it's a lack of creative ambition, I don't know. But this is why I love From Software's games, for example. Very little dialogue, very few cutscenes, but you get to be whoever you want to be as you explore and interpret these rich and complex worlds in your own way, at your own pace. Two different people can play the same exact game but have completely unique experiences, and that's what makes for fandom. That's what makes for good discussion. But every once in a while, a game and a studio do come along with a preset protagonist, and it's not about chit-chat. And there's definitely no shiny bow to be found. Their character has a good reason for existing because their past shapes their present and their future. They color the entire world in which they live. And back in the early 2000s, Remedy's Max Payne was the first great example of this I ever experienced. Max was troubled, he was unreliable. Reality and non-reality can blend and warp so quickly in those first two games, it's disorienting, but you can't stop, you can't put down the controller, you go deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole toward an uncertain conclusion that will inevitably change the way you see the protagonist, the game world, and probably even yourself. And this is exactly what Housemarque achieved with Returnal. It reminds me of Max Payne a bit, but it's even weirder, even less spelled out, even more gripping, even more powerful and relatable, in my opinion. And all this happens with very few cutscenes, dialogue, and NPCs, yet I feel Returnal achieves far more from a storytelling perspective than most games do, with lots of cutscenes, dialogue, and NPCs. But I don't necessarily want to label Returnal as an example of the less is more ethos, because I don't see it that way. A purposely stripped down and minimized experience. I see it as a carefully thought out story that simply subverts expectations and challenges norms when compared to most other stories in most other games. But it's definitely not shallow or simplistic. It's as deep as Atropos' abyssal scar. And the story and the game and the protagonist, they reward you for your curiosity. The deeper you plunge, the more they give you. And when it clicks, oh my god, does it click. The way the narrative and the gameplay and the world of mechanics are all glued together, complementing one another. Every single ingredient in Returnal is working together to create a truly one-of-a-kind experience. In an age where so many games are generic, even decent games, so many games now are uninspired copycats. Returnal has its influences, sure, but it's unlike any other game I can think of. That's why it's one of my favorite games of all time, and why Selene is one of my favorite video game characters of all time. And with Housemarque's next game, Saros, a clear spiritual successor to Returnal, only, 5-6 months away now, as excited as I am about that best-in-class action gameplay I know we're in store for, I'm almost more excited about the narrative component, which is saying a lot because, again, I don't typically play games for their stories, but I know, based on what we got in Returnal, we're surely in store for something weird, unpredictable, something moving. I know what we're getting with the gameplay, it'll be great, but the story is such an exciting question mark, so that's why it feels like a better time than ever to slow down and plunge back into Returnal, back into the world of Atropos and the mind of Selene, to better understand what this game is actually about, because man, that understanding goes so far to enhance the gameplay experience, to enhance your time with the game as a whole. So let's do it. Let's talk about what in the hell this game is about and why its unobtrusive storytelling is so very powerful. So make no mistake, Returnal is a gameplay first, story second kind of game, and most of your time with the game is spent running, dashing, blasting, just kicking ass and getting your ass kicked all over this alien world. But let's talk about on the surface what we do get story-wise, and obviously heavy spoilers will follow here, so if you haven't finished the game, including the DLC, save this video to your watch later list, go do that, and come back. Returnal starts with Selene Vassos, a pilot, a cosmonaut of sorts, working for what's called the Astra Corporation, defying orders and crash landing on the forbidden planet Atropos. She's drawn there by a mysterious signal she calls White Shadow, which feels oddly familiar to her. Her ship, Helios, is badly damaged in the landing, and with no way to contact Astra, she begins exploring. Things quickly take a surreal turn. Selene discovers dead versions of herself scattered across the planet's surface and realizes she's stuck in a time loop. Every time she dies, she wakes back up at the crash site. The planet itself shifts with each life and death cycle, and she starts having intense, dreamlike visions along the way. As she follows the White Shadow signal, Selene stumbles on a replica of her childhood home on the planet's surface, and each time she enters it, she relives old memories and repeatedly sees a mysterious astronaut in an old-fashioned spacesuit. Eventually, she uncovers a disturbing truth. She somehow used an alien weapon to shoot down her own ship, meaning, paradoxically, Selene is the reason Selene is stranded on Atropos. After finally reaching the source of White Shadow, Astra picks up Selene's distress call and sends a rescue ship. She returns back to Earth, lives out the rest of her life, dies of old age, but then wakes back up on Atropos, trapped in the same loop once again. Determined to find answers, Selene ventures deeper into the planet, eventually reaching an underwater abyss. There she finds an old automobile and encounters a massive tentacled alien creature. She's also shown a vision of a woman who resembles herself, driving through a forest at night with a child in the back seat. And on a bridge, the woman swerves to avoid the astronaut who's standing in the middle of the road, crashing through the guardrail and into the lake below. The woman tries to save the unconscious child, but is dragged away by dark, cloudy tentacles. If you complete a specific collectible challenge on the game, you unlock a secret ending. Selene returns to her home on the planet's surface, retrieves a set of car keys, goes back to the car, opens it up to find a pregnant humanoid creature in a wheelchair. After a struggle, Selene is transported back to the car crash, this time from the astronaut's point of view, suggesting that she was the figure the driver tried to avoid. The game ends with Selene underwater, swimming toward the surface and calling out the name Helios. Okay, so what the hell, right? Well, I think the best part of this story is that as a player, there's no definitively right or wrong read. I can't tell you I know exactly what it all means. I'd imagine only a few select people could, like game director Harry Kruger, narrative lead Gregory Loudon, even Selene's incredible voice actress Jane Perry probably couldn't tell you for certain, but here's my interpretation. The planet of Atropos and Selene's sci-fi exploits here, they don't exist in reality. This is all in her mind, and sometimes the "it's all a dream" trope gets shot down as cheap or lazy, but I couldn't feel more the opposite here, especially given this is an interactive experience with an unreliable narrator whose emotional horrors far exceed those on some fictitious alien world, at least to me. But I do want to say, if you choose to take a more literal approach here, if you want to believe she's actually on this planet and battling these monsters, you certainly can, and that's a fun read of the game. But I do believe most everything we experience in Returnal is psychological. It's in Selene's mind. I believe Atropos is a manifestation of grief, of inner turmoil, unresolved anger and regret, pain, trauma, confusion. This is a deeply psychological and symbolic game, with Atropos almost more than Selene herself taking center stage as a metaphorical landscape within her mind, a dark and twisted place of pain, alien horrors, and inescapable truths. In Greek mythology, Atropos is one of the three fates, three beautiful goddess sisters whose responsibility is, well, fate, determining destiny. Atropos specifically is known as the inflexible. She chooses mortals' manner of death and snips their very thread of life. Given these sisters actually spin, measure, and cut threads of destiny, calling Atropos the game's canvas feels appropriate. You can also think of Atropos as a purgatory or limbo, a gray area between past and future, heaven and hell, a place where scores are settled, a jail cell whose key has been lost like a needle in a haystack. In trying to escape Atropos, Selene is trying to escape herself, her own past, her own trauma, and at one point midway through the game, she believes she does escape, only to find herself back in its swamp, waking up next to the destroyed ship, which she must once again abandon as she braves the planet's obstacles. And those obstacles, always changing, unpredictable, reshaping themselves, have their own story, their own lore, adding another layer to Selene's turmoil. Atropos in-game was once home to an advanced race called the Sentients, who built a sprawling civilization but are now mostly extinct. Some remnants, known as the Severed, are corrupted, possibly linked to a hive mind that traps them in an endless cycle of death and rebirth. Battles raged across Atropos, and Selene, the protagonist, finds herself caught in this looping nightmare, uncovering fragments of the planet's tragic history, along with her own psyche. Selene herself, our protagonist in Greek mythology, she's the moon goddess, daughter of the titans Hyperion and Thea, who drives her chariot across the night sky. She's described as dark-eyed, silvery gray, and both feminine and masculine. In the game, Selene is a woman who tried to live up to her mother's vision and hand-me-down dreams, but could never satisfy. She's a woman who's mentally unwell, neglecting her own child, in therapy, possibly abusing drugs. Selene's ship, which crash lands on the planet, is named Helios, which, in the game's dreamlike sequences, is also the name of Selene's son. So whether represented as a marooned ship or an abandoned child, Helios is the game's emotional core. In Greek mythology, and likely in the game too, but we'll get to this later, Helios is actually Selene's brother and associated with the sun like his father. Selene's mother, Thea, is perhaps the closest thing we have to an antagonist in the story. And she was an aspiring astronaut who became wheelchair-bound after a car crash. Selene grew up caring for Thea, but resenting her and feeling blamed for what happened. This strained relationship is mirrored in Selene's own life. She tries to become an astronaut, pushed and prodded along by her mother, who's now living vicariously through her. But in the process, Selene creates the same emotional distance with her own son, Helios, likely named after her deceased brother. As I touched on a minute ago, Thea is one of the 12 Greek titans, the goddess of sight and vision, but interestingly, is rarely featured in myth and is better known for the children she bore versus her own exploits or accomplishments. Within the context of Returnal, this detail does not feel trivial to me. Selene's father, known as Hyperion in the game, is a specter over the entire story, a ghost, a shadow. In Greek mythology, Hyperion's the titan that represented the sun, and clearly in Selene's life, Hyperion was an absent figure. He perhaps blamed Selene for the state of his own life for what happened to his spouse and child. Their connection, Hyperion and Selene's, briefly, was music, the piano, an instrument he taught her how to play. And just like her mother, there is almost no mention of Selene's spouse or partner, almost like history repeated itself, and for whatever reasons, the father of Selene's child is out of the picture. The astronaut, an unnerving figure depicted throughout the game, eventually shown to be Selene herself, is no one person or thing. The astronaut represents everything: potential, pressure, family, career, love, hate. It's the monkey on Selene's back, always there, always chasing her, until she realizes no one external figure or force is ultimately responsible for her pain. Only she is. Only she can understand it, and only she can overcome it. She is the astronaut. In the Tower of Sisyphus, whose name comes from the fabled Greek king Sisyphus, who after managing to escape death is sentenced to eternal punishment in the underworld, where he's forced to roll a giant boulder up a hill, only for it to roll back down every time he reaches the top, meaning he must wash, rinse, and repeat forever, up and down the hill, a never-ending battle. A fitting comparison for Selene, who's escaped death, but is now locked in her own seemingly endless battle. And the tower's boss, Algos, in ancient Greek means pain or suffering, and is actually a root word for many English terms, such as nostalgia. This is consistent with other bosses throughout the base game, whose names and designs are all symbolic, like the game's first boss, Freak, a Greek demon of horror. While exploring the tower, Selene relives painful memories of her mother's accident, hospitalization, and eventual death, as if to imply these are Selene's most painful memories. These are the moments that haunt her most: the sterile hallway, the white poppies, the indented pillowcase. So those are the major players and locations in Returnal. Let's talk about a possible sequence of events now, keeping in mind that many of Returnal's logs, cutscenes, and environmental details do contradict one another, and not everything can be true, so the player is left to decide which details are real. And here's my personal thesis. In Washington State, Thea, an aspiring astronaut, and her partner Hyperion had a child, a boy, Helios, before Thea became pregnant again with a second child, who would be Selene. One night, either after Selene's birth or while Thea is still pregnant, Thea was in a single car accident where her car crashed through a bridge guardrail and into the water below at high speed. Hyperion was not present. Helios was, and again, Selene either was in the sense that she was young, maybe even a newborn, or still in utero. Thea's spine was critically injured in the crash, and Helios was lost. His body was never found by first responders. The crash could have been a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment, or, to take a darker turn, it could have been intentional. Perhaps Thea could only manage to save Selene and/or herself, and not Helios. Either way, Helios is gone and Thea's paralyzed. So then there's Selene, young, physically healthy, but now part of a shattered family. Hyperion, who loved music, teaches her piano before becoming estranged from the family, possibly due to divorce or abandonment. Thea, still devastated by the loss of her career aspirations and her first child, puts insurmountable pressure on Selene. She verbally and emotionally abuses Selene, instilling the idea that Selene must live for Helios and Thea, for the lives and the potential that were lost. And Selene tries. She applies to a space program but is rejected. She has a child of her own whom she names Helios, but is without a stable partner and ultimately neglects Helios in favor of her career pursuits, which don't pan out, quite possibly due to her past trauma and unstable mental state. Eventually, Thea fades, and dies. Selene does her best to make peace. She also speaks to Hyperion one last time at the funeral, but whether Selene ultimately overcomes her demons in the long run before her life ends, that's up to the player. Can you traverse Atropos' ever-changing biomes, defeat its aggressive bosses, scale the tower, and topple Algos? It's a tall order for Selene and for the player. Selene is trapped in a cycle of self-recrimination, forced to relive her failures, confront her deepest regrets. Some players fixate on Selene's eye colors, the newspaper clipping about the house fire, the idea that maybe Selene was the one who drove off the bridge. Who's Selene and who's Thea? Are there two Helioses? Was the house fire, according to a newspaper clipping, an accident, an act of murder, or just another metaphor, a family up in flames, Selene alone trying to rise from the ashes? Again, there's no right or wrong answer here, but I do believe Housemarque threw some smoke grenades into the mix, and I also believe, like we do in our own lives, Selene had fantasies, hypotheticals, even madness and rage within her. Her mental illness and past trauma makes her an extremely unreliable narrator, and it's up to the player to decide her past and future. So we've talked about the game's story at face value. We've talked about the importance of Greek mythology and psychological metaphors. We covered my personal interpretation of the narrative. And now, before wrapping, I want to just head on answer some obvious questions you might ask while playing the game. I've already touched on some of these ideas, but this gives us space to be a little more clear and a little more direct. So, number one, what is White Shadow? I feel that White Shadow is a bit of a red herring, a slight narrative decoy. Returnal thrives on metaphor and misdirection, and the idea of this cosmonaut crashing on a planet and picking up a signal like this, it feels like a mainstream plot point, right? It does get you interested. But I think White Shadow is ultimately not super important to the story and just a metaphor for Selene's own subconscious, her trauma, her guilt, her unreachable self. The signal she sends could be a cry for help to herself, echoing through the loop. The name evokes something ghostly, something unreachable and reflected, like a shadow cast by light or a memory distorted by time. By choosing to pursue this mysterious white shadow on the forbidden planet Atropos, Selene is taking her first steps toward emotional recovery, toward understanding who she is and why she's been controlled by her past. As we already discussed, the astronaut, which represents Selene and all her baggage, could also be associated with White Shadow. It's silent, faceless, and haunting, like a white shadow in physical form. Number two, the sun fragments in Sun Face. Why does this item unlock the game's true ending? These sun fragments are described as parts of a theoretical art monument in the game, suggesting they're symbolic pieces of a larger emotional or metaphysical puzzle. As she collects them, Selene says things like, I must reignite the sun, and the sun is fixed, I have to take it home, implying the sun represents something lost, perhaps warmth, clarity, life itself. Perhaps the sun represents Helios and Hyperion, who in Greek mythology are both associated with the sun, and without them, the Vassos house is not whole, it's not a home. In putting these pieces back together, Selene is getting closer to closure and understanding. The burning house is also a recurring motif that appears in dreamlike sequences and is even detailed in a readable newspaper clipping in the game, suggesting a traumatic event, possibly the car crash, the collapse of the family, or a literal fire, which shaped Selene's psyche. It may represent guilt, a moment that Selene failed to prevent, or loss, be that of a child, a parent, of her own innocence. There's a lot of fire and water, hot and cold contrasts in general across this game. Number three, what is the deal with the house fire, and is Selene a murderer? Personally, I don't believe so, and don't buy into the Selene as a murderer theory. It's interesting. It's definitely interesting to think about, but I do feel Selene becomes less interesting if she killed her entire family in a house fire. Instead, I think the fire is one of the game's more obvious metaphors. The family that was whole experienced a traumatic event and was reduced to rubble. This is a buried memory trying to resurface, a moment where an identity was destroyed. Returnal is a deliberately ambiguous game, and I don't feel we're supposed to take every apparent clue literally. Again, not everything here can be true, so to me, it's more about putting together the pieces you think fit best. Number 4. What's the deal with Selene's rescue after the Nemesis boss battle, which you realize is only the halfway point of the game? Well, I think this part is actually pretty simple. I think if we're taking everything with a grain of salt here and looking for the psychological parallels to traversing the derelict citadel and battling Nemesis and the subsequent rescue and scenes of Selene dying of old age, I believe Selene thought she had it all figured out. I believe she thought she listened to the White Shadow, she explored Atropos, and she overcame her demons. Like the first-time player stops and wonders for a second, is that it? Did I just beat the game? Is that the end? Because the Citadel, especially your first time around, is a tough biome, and Nemesis was definitely the boss that gave me the most trouble in my first playthrough, and I think that's a fairly common experience among players, and because that challenge was so great, we assumed maybe that was it, maybe we did it, but it's not true. Selene made progress for sure, but she didn't resolve all her anguish, all her history. She's closer than she was before. That's why Biome 4 is a little brighter, a little less gloomy than it was when it was Biome 1. It's different, more challenging this time, but it is familiar. We've been here before, Selene's been here before. Here's a little personal story that helps me relate to this plot twist, let's call it, where you think Selene's rescued and there's a happy ending, but then there's actually not. I dealt with a challenging situation in my own life earlier this year. Long story short, I felt I had been wronged. I had been treated poorly and just kind of hung out to dry. And it bothered me. I was hot and I was angry about it for a good while. And just when I thought I had it fully processed, someone close to me pointed out, hey, I can tell this is still eating at you. I can tell you're not quite yourself. And they were right. So I felt like I had to do something. Like I couldn't just sit in a chair and ruminate and eventually go, oh, okay, I'm good. I've cracked the code. I figured it out. I felt like I had to take action of some kind. I had to do something. So I went to this really beautiful river a couple hours away from my house, and I sat on the bank and threw smooth river rocks into the moving water. And as I picked up each rock, I assigned meaning to it. Each rock represented something negative I had been holding on to for months, and I let it go. Some were gentle tosses, others were bombs. I threw them as hard as I could. But at the end, when I let go of all the rocks, I then took off my shirt and fully dunked myself into the water too. And it was really cold water, a total shock to my system. But that's what I needed. And I swear to God, since that day, that situation that had been eating at me, it's never seriously bothered me since. I'm aware of it. It's something that happened to me. It's part of my past. It's part of my history, but it doesn't control me or own me, not anymore. But it took this like self-baptizing thing in the river. It took me sitting there for 30 minutes, kind of having this internal dialogue and skipping rocks. It took more than I thought it would to let go and move on. And I can't help but think of Selene, think of Returnal, and be like, that was her moment where she thought she had it, but she didn't. And I don't take it literally. You certainly can if you want. But I don't believe she was rescued off this planet and then lived to old age. I don't believe she was ever on the planet or that it even exists necessarily. Again, I believe this is psychological warfare in her mind. And all the little details, the news reports of the astronaut being rescued and then the burial scene, it's all to make the point that in this moment, she hadn't conquered her demons yet. She would have gone to the grave still tormented had she not done more work, another cycle on Atropos, maybe many more cycles on Atropos. But like me sitting at the river trying to not just process my feelings but truly let go of them, Selene had to go back to the crash site, back to the swamp, and do it again. Number 5, are there actually 2 different Helios characters, and is one of them really Selene's brother? I personally feel yes, because I don't think Housemarque is just dipping their toes in the water with the Greek mythology stuff in Returnal, and in mythology, Helios is Selene's sibling, and I find it far more likely there are 2 Helioses in this game, let's say, one being her dead sibling and the other being her child, named after her dead sibling, than that Thea and Selene both drove off the bridge. Another idea some players have put forward, or that there's 2 Selenes. But history does repeat itself in this story, and there definitely are patterns, that's for sure. And all these different theories are still, even if they're not my personal theories that I buy into, they're fun to explore. The game and its cycle do imply a multiverse, that there are an infinite number of Selenes. Maybe one Selene gave up in a specific biome of Atropos and decided she couldn't press on. Maybe another one defeated Nemesis, experienced the false rescue, but refused to go back to the planet and try again. Maybe there is a Selene who lost her mind completely and did burn a literal house down. There's some pretty disturbing logs, audio logs in the game of Selene talking and really not seeming well, not seeming like the Selene we know. These possible outcomes also reflect the mindset of the player. It's kind of a meta thing Housemarque is doing. Like, if you give up, you decide the game is too hard, I guess you don't care very much about helping Selene save herself, right? So anything is possible, everything is possible, but the point of Returnal, it's to break the cycle. It's to get out of this loop of pain and confusion and regret and avoidance, and for once and all, find peace, find closure. And that's reassembling the sun phase, opening the car door, confronting Thea. These are the difficult steps required to get there. Number 6, what's up with Selene's eye colors? Okay, long story short, during gameplay, Selene has one darker iris and one lighter iris. One is like a brownish, greenish, hazel color, and the other is this silvery blue color. And in the pivotal car crash scene, the woman driving the car is never explicitly identified as Selene. In fact, Selene is implied to be the astronaut on the road, not the driver. And the driver has two of the brownish, greenish, hazel irises. I believe the driver is Selene's mom, Thea. Selene's eyes appear to be experiencing what's called heterochromia, a condition where each iris is a different color and can be genetic or caused by trauma, disease, injury. This could hint at a past injury or a genetic anomaly, or it's just a visual metaphor, like duality. There's two sides of Selene, mother and daughter, astronaut and observer, conscious and subconscious. Her identity is fragmented, we know this. Her psyche is fractured. Personally, I don't feel that eye color is one of the story's more important details, kind of like White Shadow, but it's still interesting to think about. The devs put it in there for a reason. And lastly, number 7, what's up with Don't Fear the Reaper? Well, Don't Fear the Reaper is a truly classic rock song from Blue Oyster Cult's 1976 album, Agents of Fortune. The album cover depicts a magician wielding tarot cards. And the songwriter Buck Dharma has said its lyrics explore this carpe diem mentality he was thinking about at the time. That this idea that we're surrounded by death every day, so we shouldn't fear it. We should live boldly and live without regret. The lyrics specifically relate this attitude to a couple of lovers, with Dharma once saying it's, quote, a love song where the love transcends the actual physical existence of the partners. In Returnal, it suggested this song may have been playing on the radio when the bridge crash occurred, as well as that it was a song played on vinyl in the Vassos household, maybe even a particular favorite song of Hyperion, as his organ music associated with his boss fight features motifs from Don't Fear the Reaper. I think it was a brilliant choice to feature this song in-game by the Housemarque team. It's one of those super popular, obvious songs that everyone knows, everyone takes for granted, but whose meaning not everybody has slowed down and thought about. I think within the context of Returnal, this section of lyrics toward the end of the song is particularly interesting. Love of two is one, here but now they're gone. Came the last night of sadness, and it was clear she couldn't go on. And the door was open and the wind appeared, and the candles blew and then disappeared, and the curtains flew and then he appeared, and she had no fear. Then they started to fly, she had become like they are, Don't Fear the Reaper. No matter how you slice it up, this is a fascinating game, a fascinating story in a brilliant studio, a masterwork that runs circles around most other games and stories I can think of. And when you begin to wrap your head around this game's unique narrative and complex themes, it only enhances that action gameplay, the enemy types, the parasites, and Selene seemingly modifying herself and abilities, the way the planet's lore overlaps and intermingles with her own. Again, I'll push back against any criticism of the it's all a dream trope here, because personally I don't feel the game is as powerful if this is just another sci-fi romp. Kind of how The Sopranos isn't really about the mafia, that's just the backdrop. It's much more about family, identity, and human nature. And I find it far more fascinating and worth discussing and analyzing if the warfare we live out in Returnal is actually happening in Selene's mind. I find it far scarier and far more open to interpretation. But I know ambiguity frustrates some readers, viewers, and players when it comes to media and entertainment. Some people really do just want clear dialogue, cutscenes, and answers, and they feel ripped off if they don't get those things. But that's not what Returnal's offering, and personally that's why I love it. This game has a spine, this game has a reason for existing, there was a vision here. And that's what makes it such a fascinating experience to discuss with other players, which is why I want to hear your own thoughts in the comments. Did anything I say here get you thinking about the game differently, or do you have your own interpretation you're sticking to? If you enjoyed this discussion, I did a 4-part Let's Play of Returnal a couple years ago here on the channel, and I've linked those videos down in the description. You also might like joining my Discord server, Terapop's Treehouse, or my Patreon for more content and discussions like this. Either way, thank you for watching and listening. I look forward to hearing your thoughts about this very special game down in the comments, and I will catch you next time.